Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to Dennis's Art Studio. I am back. Welcome to another stream. And in today's video, we're going to do something a little bit different. I will be covering some of the news when it comes to the art world. Yes, so I am Dennis Saliba. I am your host, and I am the founder of the show Dennis's Art Studio, as well as the studio itself. There's a lot going on at the moment. I am currently in the process of kind of reorganizing and renovating the art studio area at the moment. So that's most likely why you haven't been seeing me stream lately. On another note, I will be using a number of platforms. I think using a number of platforms would be fine for the art studio's needs. I really like the trailers and the intro slides and the bumper slides for Filmora 9. So I want to go back to Filmora 9. But in terms of other editing platforms, I do want to use like Cyberlink, PowerDirect, and all of that. Having said that, let's get into the show. Today is a bit of a newer part of the show, and we're going to be looking at some art news in the world of art and in the world of anime in particular. This show does have a particular emphasis on anime, as much as I look at other independent artists and stories and mythologies and whatnot. But having said that, a new segment of the show, let's look into art stuff. So, the world of anime. The push to go digital opens new doors for anime, reports the Japan Times. And this article was written on the 20th of January 2022 by Matt Schley, which I'm guessing is just like a contributing writer. So, major foreign media companies are making aggressive moves into the anime realm by taking an active role in creating original projects such as Star Wars Visions on Disney as well. So they're trying to use the anime art style to recreate an already pre-existing franchise. The COVID-19 pandemic, now entering its third year, has done to the Japanese animation industry the same thing it has done to many others: push trends that were already unfolding into warp speed. Case in point, digitization. Now, having said that, I would like to note that the digitization of anime has been occurring for quite a while now. One key film series was Karas back in like 2006. I think it was when it was first released in Japan, sometime in the West, 2007, around the time in the West. Karas used a blended animation style of 3D animation and traditional hand-drawn 2D animation. In my opinion, it's one of the few animes that actually managed to pull off the best of both worlds within the same series and the same production. But the trend towards digitization, I reckon, has been heading towards that at least since 2006, 2007, with that particular anime in mind. There's probably many others. Appleseed kind of comes to mind as well. That was released in about 2004. And around the same time, you had Ghost in the Shell, Second Gig, and Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, which used kind of a blended animation style too. So the blended animation style has been going on for quite some time, but the pressure of the market from COVID has been pushing that. Good to see you in the chat, Infamous Rifle. Thank you for coming by. I appreciate your viewership, man. And it was actually Infamous Rifle, by the way, that recommended that I look at Cyberlink, PowerDirector, and Vegas Studios. So good suggestions, man. Good suggestions. So the COVID-19 pandemic, case in point, digitization, as we've been discussing already. For years, animators in Japan have stubbornly held onto paper and pencil to draw keyframes, which is true. It had been happening even as far back as 2006, 2007, while tasks like coloring and special effects have long since moved to the digital realm, the exception being probably Studio Ghibli. Studio Ghibli being the main exception, he still hires painters to do the coloring of his work and the coloring of the backgrounds. Each background frame that you see in a Studio Ghibli movie is literally an artwork within an artwork. This decidedly analog first step means lots of paper being stuffed into envelopes, collated and scanned in by harried production assistants. However, an era of remote work, i.e., more outsourcing, more market pressure from the COVID economy to basically make everything more digitalized, more outsourced, more efficient, I guess, has pushed more animators to go digital, either scanning in their pencil and paper frames at home or starting from digital scratch with advances like Apple Pencil, making it easier to say goodbye to the physical, thereby making the costs of maintaining a physical studio obviously decreased, and also the costs of needing to rent out an apartment also gone because the person can work from home, they're outsourced from a home office, therefore studios don't need to rent out that particular rental space. This march of ones and zeros is a mixed blessing for studios and animators. On the one hand, it's allowing industry to expand to places other than Tokyo. Japanese animators are notoriously underpaid, and the ability to work from anywhere means they can escape to areas with cheaper rent and better living conditions. They can also outsource to the West with a younger, fresher series of mangaka, one could argue, that are just as keen to get into the Japanese market too. Studios are also taking advantage of this situation. Late last year, Production IG announced plans to open a branch in Niigata, where it expects to receive government subsidies for helping to revitalize the area. Digital submission has also allowed people from around the world to participate in the industry. Young animators outside Japan, raised on a diet of anime, are now helping to produce it from oceans away, i.e., more automation of not just the illustration and animation process and the coloring process. In a way, you're seeing a streamlining of the outsourcing process in terms of the personnel. But as anyone who has worked remotely the past 2 years knows, it isn't all positive. For one, the lack of in-person communication has put a damper on networking and creativity. I would also add, culturally speaking, Japanese cultural thinking tends to be very conservative in nature. Having been someone who does teach Japanese students from time to time, a lot of Japanese thinking might look progressive in terms of the overall face value, but in terms of the working relationship, they're still very much conservative to this day. And a lot of those cultural thought patterns and biases and thought processes are still there, at least within the Japanese backgrounded business acumen. Since most animators are freelance, conversations at the water cooler or the local pub are often key for finding that next job or swapping ideas. It also forced animators, often on tight deadlines and budgets, to double as their own production assistants. So therefore, there's more pressure on the person to be more efficient on a tighter budget, investing time and money on expensive scanners or computing devices. But even if and when animators go back to meeting up in person, the digital revolution is here to stay. You have people like we've discussed on my news channel before, like Klaus Schwab, the fourth industrial revolution, the whole automation of not just automating how people conduct their business, but also how people interact with people has been automated as well. The fourth industrial revolution is here to stay. Meanwhile, the international market will continue to grow in importance. The year 2020 was the first in which anime made more money abroad than in Japan. Interesting trend and quite a big one to note. I would also add that a lot of this has to do with counterculture in the West, in particularly with the whole woke movement. What you're seeing is not just animation in Japan becoming more popular abroad, but you're also seeing companies like Netflix trying to outsource the art style to appeal to a Western audience. In addition, you're seeing even Korean production of not necessarily animation per se, but Korean studios increasing in importance in the West because they themselves are creating these newer, creative, newer, non politically aligned stories which do not fit the woke agenda, which Westerners are using as their escape to otherwise access another world, another storyline, another universe, if you will. And the Korean, as much as the Japanese, have been providing this, especially as of the last 2 years. So that's a pretty interesting trend to note. I'm going to highlight it there. Um, it's quite interesting to note how Japan usually used to be the gatekeeper of anime and manga, but it's also expanding even in the Chinese market. You're seeing C manga now emerge as a new niche market, and also other studios in Asia becoming much more popular because people do not want to deal with woke. People don't want to deal with woke. They just don't want to deal with it. Giant media companies have figured out that the audiences live all over the world. Even Disney Plus got into the game last year. And in the early days of 2022, one of the few remaining independent anime distributors in the United States, Houston-based Sentai Holdings, was purchased by AMC Networks, the company responsible for prestige dramas such as Mad Men and The Walking Dead. The old business model, pioneered in the 1980s and 1990s by folks like Sentai, was to simply license and localize whatever Japan had to offer. But big boys like Disney and Netflix are taking a more active role in the creation of content, commissioning projects like Star Wars Visions and omnibus of shorts like in the Star Wars universe, or Yasuke, which I have seen. Yasuke wasn't too bad. I've watched the series Yasuke. Um, the art style itself, I actually enjoyed. It was kind of like a mixture between what you would expect in anime mixed with some of the Western style of outline in terms of the physical outlines of some of the characters. And the shadowing was done in a kind of a Western comics type of way. It was an interesting blend, but the storyline itself did kind of crescendo, and then I think they ended the series too abruptly, but that's just my perspective, Yasuke. A series helmed by an American director about a real life black samurai. There were, like I said, like I was thinking when I watched the series, historically speaking, that is accurate. It was a real life black samurai living in Japan around the time of, I think, Nobunaga's rule. But at the same time, there was a lot of mythological elements added to it as well. It wasn't exactly clear which genre it was. I would have personally stopped at about two genres, like having um, a magical and medieval Japan kind of blend. That would have been fine. They kind of added a mech element to it, which to me kind of diluted the overall impact of the genre. But that's just my hunch. You guys feel free to watch the show. Feel free to give your perspective in the comments down below. Projects such as these have caused heated debates online about what should or shouldn't be considered anime. And again, we're talking about an art style which is very conservative by nature and has been historically conservative by nature, and generally gate kept by Japanese mangaka and Japanese artists. But with sales increasing abroad, international productions are likely to keep coming. At the same time, while the domestic market may be shrinking, it's proving less fickle than those overseas. China is one example. Sea manga, as I call it, Chinese manga. Starting last year, it began taking an even harder line on what kind of content it allows into the country. We've seen this with the CCP trying to regulate not just video games coming in from the West into the Chinese market. We also see this with Japanese content in terms of especially the romance genre, which are heavily regulated by the CCP, and certain scenes are not allowed into the country, just period, and should be otherwise considered non-Chinese, non-patriotic. Chinese censors now require an entire anime series to be presented for approval, as per the new regulations rolled out by the Chinese Communist Party, not just one episode at a time, making simultaneous streaming virtually impossible. Its censors are also now rejecting more titles outright. Production committees, depending on the Chinese market, may be forced to reconsider their content and adjust their production schedules to fall into CCP line. In terms of titles aimed primarily at Japanese audiences, isekai, tales of men and women transported from their boring lives to fantasy worlds, will continue to be dominant in 2022. Who wouldn't want to be transported to another world right now? In addition, look for producers to try to replicate the success of Demon Slayer. I'm in the process of watching Demon Slayer now. Overall, I don't find the production to be too bad, but I do find it to be overhyped. Again, my perspective, I'm more of one of those 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009 one of those teenagers growing up at that time that watched that type of anime, like a Death Note, Full Metal Alchemist when that was novel, etc. So overall, I'm enjoying Demon Slayer, but having said that, I do find it to be predictable at times. By funding high-quality adaptation of shonen boys manga, such as the upcoming Chainsaw Man, in the theatrical film, staples like Detective Conan and One Piece will be joined by original properties like Bubble, which owes a clear visual debt to the Makoto Shinkai hits Weathering with You and Your Name. Speaking of Shinkai, his own new film, Suzume no Tojimari, is headed to theaters this fall. So that's it. What do you guys think of the automation of the manga and anime industry? Do you think that it will bring on new horizons? Do you think that it will bring on false horizons? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for your viewership. Let's seek to enjoy art for art's sake, especially in these troubling times. I am your host as well as your studio founder, Dennis Saliba, and I will be more active on this channel as well as a few other channels because I have a lot in the works right now. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now, and take care.